planning that we have a 2 hours interactive session. And the first hour, we plan to give it to panelists who I will introduce later at some point. And then the next 1 hour, we can have an interactive session. And just as Steve has said, we had emphasized that we all come on board having gone through the forest policy. So it is our hope that people made time and were able to go through the policy. So just to take you back where this process began, we received a notification around the 15th of June that the Ministry of Environment and Forestry had initiated a public review process of the forest policy and the eventual amendment of the Forest Conservation and Management Act of 2016. So in response to that, as agents of change and as people who are in the conservation space, we felt that we needed to jump in quickly, make effort to make sure that we attend to that policy, we look at it, because eventually it will affect our conservation work. So we came up with a consortium of organizations that would sit down and address the policy. And that included the Worldwide Fund for Nature, Conservation Alliance of Kenya, and the East African Wildlife Society through the Kenya Forest Working Group. So we began our engagement by having our first meeting, which was organized by WWF Kenya office. And that meeting was held on the 22nd of June. Then we moved on to another meeting on the 24th of June. And then we had another meeting on the 30th of June. So those were 3 meetings that critically assessed the policy. And on board, we had a number of representatives from the civil society organizations and other stakeholders. So the civil society organizations that were involved are those working in conservation across the country. We had people drawn from as far as Narok County, Kwale County. We had the Lake Naivasha Basin group that also participated in contributing towards the review of the policy. So basically, in a nutshell, that is how far we've come. And we felt as civil society organizations and as partners who have been working in this, it is good that we culminate this in, by having this particular meeting with experts who will highlight on key issues that have been raised as contentious issues or issues of concern before we submit our comments to the ministry, because we all know that the deadline is on the 7th of July this month. So we only just have a few days, and maybe someone comes to the deadline. We have analyzed and realized that Kenyans have this culture of working very hard towards the deadline. So we felt that this would actually motivate and push people to work towards responding to this call, and hence the plan for this meeting on this particular day. So I'll just state the objective of the meeting, and then we proceed by requesting one of our team members who has captured the issues that we have been discussing in the 3 meetings to take us through before I call upon the panelists to discuss with us what they know about the forest policy. So the objective of this meeting is basically to bring many stakeholders as possible to participate in the review process, so that eventually when the policy is adopted, we have the aspect of ownership and everyone having taken part in the review process. So we looked across the board and we felt that we need a representation of various stakeholders in the forestry sector. So we have on board Mr. Gerald Ngatia, who has been in the field of forest for quite a number of years, and he's been working closely with communities. So he will be representing the National Alliance of Community Forest Associations, that is NACOFA. And of course, there are several people who have also been working alongside Gerald Ngatia in the Forest Working Group, who are also on board. And I also wish to recognize the presence of our second panelist, Dr. Walubengo. It was actually an uphill task getting Dr. Walubengo. He has such a busy schedule. So Daktari, karibu sana. Dr. Walubengo, as most of you know, has been in the forest sector for quite many years. So Dr. Walubengo, we take you as an expert in this field. You have participated in many policy formulation and legislative processes, and we are sure that will be useful in this particular discussion. Our other panelist is Dr. Paul Ogugo, who has been working with the Kenya Forestry Research Institute, that is KEFRI, as a researcher, and is also an economist. I talked to him a while ago, but he's having problems with his connectivity because he's out of town. He's all the way in Migori County, but he promised that he will join along the way. So those are the three panelists that we have in this particular group. They are a good representation of the stakeholders. We tried to get hold of KFS, but we were not able to get a representative. We also tried to get hold of KEPSA, but I think we were also not successful. But even so, I'm sure the people who have already joined the meeting, we have guys who have interacted with the people in the private sector and people within the government who will shed some light on some key issues that maybe the guys who are missing would have wanted to talk about. So moving on, I'll call upon Zero. Moses Zero is the executive director of the African Nature Organization, I hope I've got it right, based in Kilifi County. So Zero is one of the team members that we have been working with, and he has documented in summary the outcomes of the discussions or the consultations we have had from the three meetings I've just highlighted. So at this point, allow me to welcome Zero to give that overview, and then we'll move on to the panelists who will shed some light, having some background information from what has been happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine, for that opportunity. I hope you are able to see the presentation on your screens.
Yes, it is.
Is it clear? It's clear.
Yeah, we can see it. It's clear.
Okay. Okay, these are the comments, some of the comments that are captured in the three meetings that we had on 22nd, 24th, and 30th of June, mainly from stakeholders under Kenya Forest Working Group, the National Environment Civil Society Alliance of Kenya, and the Conservation Alliance of Kenya. Let me begin by giving the general comments and feeling of members about this policy. One, government policies, and especially this forest policy, is geared towards giving an indication of the intentions of the government in terms of what it intends to do or to see done in the forest sector, either in the short term or medium term or the long term. But in this particular policy document, there is no clear sense of the direction, the new direction that the government intends to take, the priorities and areas of emphasis. This was something that was participants felt was missing in this document. Again, this document makes reference to Vision 2030. 20 years ago, when we were talking about 2030, Vision 2030, it looked like centuries to come. But now in 2020, when you're talking about 2030, it's just next day. I think in the next less than 10 years, we'll be already there. So I think this policy should have been anchored on a much longer term vision, like Vision 2063. Again, this document lacks definitions, and we struggled as we went through it to understand what exactly was meant by forest, terms like indigenous forest, farm forestry, plantation, and many others that were key in understanding the intentions of the government. So I'll begin with, I'll go chapter by chapter in highlighting the key concerns that were raised. And in chapter 1, introduction, section 1.5, the formulation process. It's not clear how KFS and representing the government and the ministry undertook this process of formulating this draft policy. There is a mention of having consultative meetings, but it doesn't give a clear picture of who participated, regions that were participated in this process, the dates and even participants. So it is not clear how this process was undertaken, going by what is captured in the document. Again, there's an earlier copy of the same draft that was in 2014, and it looks like a cut and paste copy of the same. In section 1.5, there's a reference to the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, as is currently. But participants felt that probably the reference could only be to the ministry responsible for forestry, because this ministry are changed depending on who the government of the day. On chapter 2, situation analysis, on section 2.1 on sustainable management of diverse forests and trees, tree plantations, there are so many drivers that have been captured, but we know the situation in Kenya that probably corruption plays a bigger role in forest degradation and the destruction that has happened so far in the forest sector. So participants felt that this should be mentioned as one of the key drivers of forest degradation in Kenya. Again, in the introductional part, we know that forests are managed in some cases by multiple agencies. So there was a need to have the roles and the mandates of these lead agencies clearly captured in this document. On section 2.210, under situation analysis, there was a mention of PELIS, but under this section, the focus is more on the negative aspects of PELIS. And mainly the community members who are dealing directly with those stakeholders that are undertaking this process or this mechanism said that even the positive side should also be highlighted. Again, section 2.12, focusing on indigenous and local communities, there is a highlight on indigenous people and the role that they've taken in terms of managing indigenous forests or even forests in general. But we also know that local communities and even other, because there are only a mention of 2 indigenous communities, including of CAKs, but we know that indigenous people are not only the 2 communities, the other communities that are also doing some great job in terms of managing forest resources. So the mention of local communities and the role they play is important in this section. Again, section 2.14.1 on monitoring and evaluation focuses more on the impact. But monitoring and evaluation also can include the process that results into the impacts that are being evaluated. So broadened to cover also the impacts of the process of the whole process. Again, there was a highlight on the challenges in terms of collecting information, getting information, update information on forest cover, forest processes, but participants felt that it was not only, there's a lot of information with various stakeholders within the forest sector, including individuals and NGOs. So probably KFS could be encouraged to develop a repository where all this information could be captured and easily accessed to by stakeholders in the forestry sector. On chapter 3, goals, objectives, and the general guiding principles, section 3.1 on overall goals, it mentions benefits to the people of Kenya, benefits from forest resources, but we know that
Zero, I request that you please try and summarize.
Okay, I'm just summarizing.
Yeah.
The benefits, we know that the benefits are beyond Kenya. We know that the water towers, the waters are enjoyed by Ugandans, Sudanese, and even Egypt, up to Egypt. So focusing mainly, talking about benefits, accruing only to Kenyans might be very limiting. Again, there is a mention on the forest cover, and this was targeting 10%. But I think for this policy, the target should be beyond 10% and even 50%. Not only 10% has been used severally, and probably now it's time to think of a figure beyond 10%. The policy objectives, members felt that these were so many, 18, and probably some of them could be collapsed to make the objectives much less, maybe 7 or so. Again, under the objectives that have been highlighted, section E talks of ecosystem services, and members felt that it should be ecosystem goods and services, because then it captures the whole spectrum of the benefits that accrue from ecosystems. Again, members felt that there's need to have a standalone objective on PFM. On the guiding principles, again, members felt that there should be at least a guiding principles that speaks to PFM. We also know that forests, like any other, the other sectors, agriculture, fisheries, and others, depend on land. So if forestry is to cover more than 10% of land surface in Kenya, probably they'll have to extend to other lands that are not specifically under forest. So probably a guiding principle on how that can be undertaken, especially in terms of land use planning, as a guiding principle, could also enhance this chapter. Chapter 4 on sustainable management of forests. 4.1, this is a statement targeting Paris, and actually it's talking about phasing it all together. And members felt that either it be rephrased to reflect that Paris will not be phased out, but instead will be enhanced, either with clear guidelines and monitoring mechanisms. So either it is either be deleted or improved to reflect that it will be systematically be improved over time. Under 4.5, it talks about coastal forestry, but members felt that forestry is more of a study, but here we're talking about a resource, so probably it will reflect coastal forests. Again, mangroves are missing in this, and they felt that this is a unique resource that should be captured under this. Again, chapter 5 on management of trees and trees outside forests. We know that agroforestry and farm forestry is a shared responsibility currently between the national government and the county government. And members felt that there should be a policy statement speaking to strengthening these county governments to carry out agroforestry and farm forestry activities. Section 7.1 on forest education, training, and research. There is a feeling that coastal forestry, especially the kayas and the mangroves, are not well captured in the current training curriculum of foresters. So members felt that at least this should be looked into so that at least it is captured. Again, to enhance this, members proposed that there be established a national training institution at the coast that probably will specifically focus on coastal forests. In chapter 7, the introduction part recognizes CFAs as stakeholders in the institutional framework, paylease farmers, and the county government. And there is members felt that RUAs also play a role, a bigger role. The beach management units, especially in mangroves and parts of coastal forests. And then a section that sometimes might be lost when we are talking about stakeholders in the forestry sector, especially the Tree Growers Association, those that practice farm forestry. So we felt that this also should be mentioned so that while developing the policy statements, they are also captured. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Zero, for that informative summary. I think you really captured the issues that we have been discussing in the 3 meetings. And of course, this has now set pace for the panelists as well as the participants, because maybe for the sake of those who have not gone through the policy, at least now you have an overview of what the policy is and the reactions that people have had on the policy so far. So without much ado, I think I'll invite Dr. Dominic Walubengo to start us off. And Daktari, you are most welcome. You can share with us what you feel about this particular policy. But what I would want you to address at first, before you progress into talking about any other thing about the policy, is just to explain to us why a policy, because you have been in the forestry sector for quite a number of years, and maybe you could enlighten us on whether the previous policies have met their objectives and they have lived to their expectations, or they have failed, and hence, why is it always that we need a policy, and why do we always have to review a policy for that matter? Because for this particular policy, most people are saying that it is not giving us direction. We feel a bit lost, yeah? The objectives are too ballooned and they're not very specific. And of course, they have even left out some aspects that they need to have captured, which they have not captured. So the floor is yours, Daktari. Please engage with us and enlighten us more. Thank you. Dr. Walubengo, can you hear us? Dr. Walubengo, are you there?
Let me help him unmute his
Hello,
phone.
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I can also hear
Can you hear me?
Yes, please
Okay.
proceed.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm happy to be on this forum today. You mentioned that I was very busy. I was actually forest planting trees with communities. We have planted 33,000 trees in the forest. Now, regarding your question about why a policy, let me first of all say that Kenya has not had a forest policy since 1968. I think I was in Form 2 or Form 1. So we have not had a policy since then. And all these other policies we've been referring to are draft policies. And the 1968 policy, I've got a copy, by the way, for those of you who don't have a copy, I can forward it to you. The main statement in that policy says the government of Kenya will protect the forests with all the means at its disposal. That's a main policy statement in that 1968 policy. And that's the same policy that's being used right now to evict people from forests. We have not had a new policy since then. That's why, Celine, that's why we need a new policy right now. Things have changed a lot since 1968. How many years is that? Those who can calculate quickly. Can you hear me?
It's about 53.
Yes, 53 years. Yes, thank you, Steve. Is that Steve?
Yes, that is Steve Itela.
Yeah, it's many years since we had a forest policy. Now, I just want to make some general statements first on this policy. I'll not go in details the way Moses has done, although I've got the details written and I'll send them to you. I think that this policy has been written in a dishonest manner, and that there are things under the table which are not very clear to the casual reader. The first one is the ministry wants to restructure KFS, the Kenya Forest Service, to remove the regulatory and business divisions, that's plantations, and leave only the management of indigenous forests with the institutions. The Forest Service is an institution under the ministry. If the ministry wants to restructure it, they don't have to do it through this policy. They can do it administratively. Now, the second statement that that Zero has mentioned, but may not be very clear again, is that the ministry would like to stop pellies. That's a plantation establishment system using communities who live next to the forests. Now, the excuse for stopping pellies is that it's difficult to manage, and that communities have taken advantage of pellies, and the afforestation is not continuing. But this is the carelessness of the government. The government has got means and ways to ensure that communities obey the regulations regarding pellies. Just because the communities are taking advantage does not mean it's a bad system. That system has worked well in Ghana, it has worked in Uganda, it has worked in Burma, and it has worked previously in Kenya. It's just that, as I think Moses mentioned it, corruption has got in, and it's a question of getting rid of that corruption. My third view about this policy is that the policy is trying to kick out community forest associations from participating in forest management. Again, this is a very dangerous move. That means we're making our communities weak, and we're moving them from benefiting from participating in forest management. The community forest associations were included in the 2005 law, and these are forest adjacent communities. And I'm going to write to the minister and assure him that if communities are not involved in the management of forests, and if they do not benefit from forests, they're going to ban those forests. It has happened in another place, in other countries. The fourth item that the government or the writers are trying to hide is that they would like to lease out plantation forests to timber companies. I've talked to some timber companies. The big ones are agreeable. They would like to lease a lot of land and plant trees. The small ones are afraid that if that happens, they are going to lose out, because the big timber companies will only plant trees for themselves, and the smaller companies will not have access to those trees. Now, as we know in this country, leasing out government land for, let's say, 30 or 40 years, by the time the 40 years pass and the lease elapses, that land is likely to be dished out to politically correct people. The government will not let us know that the lease is out, and they'll just lease out that land. We all know what has happened at the Ngong Forest, and how the government degazetted 53 hectares, and we ended up losing 1,000 hectares and more. So leasing out forests we must be very, very careful, and we must have very good reasons and very good structures for doing so. The fifth item, and I'm about to finish, Madam Moderator, the policy is refusing to give the county governments a role in managing forests or supporting farmers. This is stated very clearly in the Constitution, the fourth schedule, part 2, number 10. The county governments are supposed to implement policies from the national government regarding forestry, water, and so forth. Now, this policy, although in institutional arrangements, it has talked about it, but it's not serious. They do not want to hand over some aspects of managing forests to the county governments as per the Constitution. And the sixth and last one is that the policy is refusing to accept that charcoal is a major industry and it's here to stay. We're pretending by saying that we shall make charcoal in dry lands and so forth, just glossing over the fact. The fact is, if I visit the CS today and there's roast meat, he'll probably be using charcoal. this business of refusing to accept charcoal as an industry, to me, is we're being hypocritical. We're not being honest. Madam Chair, I've got those are my 6 main points on the draft. And the other point I would like to mention is that the entire document should go through a language edit. There's been an attempt to pick and paste from previous draft policies and even from the task force, which the minister instituted, I think it was in 2018 February. And regarding that task force, Madam Chair, I just want to mention that it was an advisory to the minister, and it should not be put into the policy. This one of my statements. I've said that the policy should not include that task force because the minister was being advised, and the task force was not gazetted and published for everybody to comment on. Madam Facilitator, let me leave it there. I've got these other many comments that I'll send out by email. I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Walubengo. That was quite comprehensive. We have taken note of the points that you have given with regard to the policy. And as I'm informed that you don't have much time with us, I would wish to open the floor before I call upon the other panelists for people to engage with you on the comments that you have given. So the floor is open to interact with Dr. Walubengo before he leaves. And then I think we can move on to the other panelists. And how we will go about this is that people will have to raise their hands so that we give you a chance to engage with Daktari. In the interest of time, so can we have people engaging with Daktari? Any questions for him? Any
There's a hand
clarification?
from Lucy. There's a hand from Lucy, Dr. Wamkoya, and Nixon Orwa.
Okay, so we will go, we will go in that order. Let me have Lucy, and then Dr. Wamkoya will follow, and then Nixon. So Lucy, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Walubengo, really for clarifying a lot of key areas that are important for a successful policy. I just wanted to ask you for your thoughts on the charcoal component. It is you have said the truth as it is, but because we deny that truth, we continue finding illegal logging, which of course, and illegal charcoal burning, which is not regulated, or and enforcement measures are fairly weak. But the reality is that if we don't make those provisions, then we can be sure for the next many generations, it will continue to be a cat and mouse game. Would you you have specific recommendations you would want to see included in what would make some innovative statements on providing for charcoal for Kenyans? It would really help us greatly in providing those thoughts into the recommendations for the policy, because maybe the government is bankrupt of ideas. We could use your expertise and others in this forum. Really looking for some thoughts from you on that.
Next is
Thank
Dr.
you,
Wamkoya.
Lucy. Let's have Dr. Wamkoya and then Nixon, and then Daktari can respond to all the issues raised by the three. Dr. Wamkoya.
Yeah, thanks, moderator. Hey, hi, Dominic.
Hey, hi, my brother. How are you?
You're still alive. At least I left forest for you. I left forest for you. Yeah, no, I think it's thanks for the observations, and thanks Zero for the work that the team has done. Very useful. I think in my view, we need to relook at the forest sector in a much more holistic manner. And this goes back to the question, since we are in different ministry, this goes back to the question now, if the ministry is saying it wants to separate plantation and indigenous forests in the manner they are proposing, then it raises a big issue because some of those forests are actually the habitats of wildlife. And then the question would be, would the KFS be the right institution to manage indigenous forests, or KWS, or another institution? I don't know which one. That's the first question. So it's a very important issue that stakeholders must answer that question. Because I happen to have been in this field for a while, and I know that there was a time we even did provide that indigenous forests be handed over, managed under KWS, and the service becomes important in terms of forest development and management. So this is an area that needs to be looked at. In terms of pellies and whatever, to me, it is simply institutional failure, which cannot be attributed to a policy. Communities, whether you like it or not, have a role to play in the forest management, whichever way you look at it. So for anyone to imagine that the private companies are going to just employ fellows, locals, and people will burn those forests. And we're not going to have even the 10% that we are talking about. So if I'm not benefiting and you are in my region and I need that land, I'll burn it. And we've seen that happening. So I think as stakeholders, you need to come out very strongly in respect to.
Hello, I cannot hear you.
Why are you not hearing me?
I can hear you now, yes.
So for me, a question of a community being locked out, pellies being locked out, we've had that debate before. We can't go back there. We have now very tested community associations, which can be strengthened, and I think they're doing a good job. They started, they were not provided support, but I think they have now lived beyond the need. They have now established themselves, and they should be supported to do that, and they self-regulate. I think it's nothing new about that. Now, Lucy, about again charcoal. Yeah, I know it's a very emotive issue. Bear in mind the forest destruction and the rest. But the reality is, I think, Dominic, you know, you remember I did the charcoal regulations. And we really went.
Yes, I remember.
And we did go through very intensive stakeholder engagement. I travel across the country, all those districts and as they were then, and it was very clear that we had to find a way by which we regulate charcoal, because even those of us who pretend and write these laws, we use charcoal in one way or another.
Absolutely.
And therefore we find the need. So we have charcoal regulations, which are very intensive, and they actually specify which type of kiln is to be done, to be used, and how to package and market charcoal. So it's a question of enforcement that has simply not a need. So the question of saying you can outlaw it, yes, you can do it, but you don't have police to be everywhere to lock out these people. So in my view, the policy, just to underscore again, Kenya does not have a revised policy since 1968. That is a fact. The second, and I think this is something that as stakeholders you need to know, the mistake we make is that when we submit the policy together with the bill to Parliament, under our constitutional dispensation, Parliament cannot amend the policy. It has to adopt it because that is what the government then is saying wants to do. So you cannot change it. They find space in the bill because that's where they have authority to change. And so once you put it on the table in Parliament and is given a number, they forget about it, the minister forgets about it, they continue to approve the bill, and once they approve the bill, you can no longer bring the policy because then it's after the fact. So now that's why we have permanently remained in many of our sectors with the draft sessional papers, as opposed to having first the sessional paper, and then after that you do a bill, and a bill simply means that the law is only going to implement the actionable parts of the policy. The policy is supposed to be aspirational. So there are other ingredients in the policy that cannot be enforced by law, but they instill change of behavior in the way you look at things, aspirational. What do you aspire to do? So that is the thing that you need to look at, that even as you engage in this process, you have now to see how best first we get the policy adopted by Parliament so that it becomes a sessional paper, and then the bill or whatever amendments that they are proposing. I think I'll end there so that we get more space for other colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, Daktari. I think we need to proceed and give other people a chance to speak also, but thank you for that elaboration. And I'm sure now Dominic will just have to add a few explanations to that. So let me give a chance to Nixon so that we finish the first round, then Dr. Walubengo can respond. Yes, Pat?
Sorry, before that, William Kimosop has had his hand up since the beginning. Maybe
Yes.
you could give him a chance to ask his question before we move to the last presenter.
Yes, I'll come to William. I had Nick, I think, in the first lot. So Nixon can go, then William Kimosop will follow. And then there's also a hand from Olivia Odhiambo. So let's have Nixon.
Thank you so much, Celine, and thank you, Dr. Walubengo. I think for me, I just wanted to talk on Pelis, and I think Dr. has talked about it, is that it's a more, like Dr. says, it's more of corruption. And for government, for example, they have to deal with corruption than saying on the communities. And I would give an example so well in Peli. So when they hear the government saying that they want to ban this because of corruption, they wonder what this means. And the thing that sometimes it tricks you more is that, I think, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, we had stories that in the Menengai area, the government is trying to uproot some indigenous trees so that they can introduce Pelis. And you're wondering, on one side, the government is saying that they are banning Pelis. On the other side, they want to introduce it elsewhere. So which animal do we believe? Do we believe the one that wants to ban Pelis or the one that wants to introduce it elsewhere? So again, it's really challenging, and I hope this is something that we can resolve. But finally, just as a comment, I realize that in the natural resource sector, the government seems to be pulling back on so many of these gains. You look at the ROAs, the government seems to be saying that it's like they want to take some of the roles that ROAs were playing to take back to the government. You look at the wildlife sector, I think the CWCCs are like now becoming departments of government, and I think now on CFA. So again, it's a bigger problem and a bigger picture that we really need to put our heads together and see how we can resolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Nixon. I have another round of hands up. There's also a hand from Adams that has been up for a while now. So I'll start with William Kimosop, then I go to Adams, then Olivia Odhiambo, then Dr. Walubengo can respond to. So let's start with the Nijek Adams. Your hand is up.
Yes, hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much. I'm here with Sveva and Sveva Gauman. Yeah, I just wanted to point out, obviously we've had a certain amount of experience on something that
Sorry,
Sveva
Adams, we
pointed
can't
out in the
get you
comments as
clearly.
well, was that I was just saying that on the sustainable charcoal, the charcoal front,
Yes.
which has been pointed out by a number of the speakers. I mean, we've been monitoring this very closely, and we've watched it since they implemented the ban. which was now 2 years ago. And obviously the start of that implementation was to come up with either a different legislation or a different policy. And we've been watching it for 2 years. And what we've seen is that absolutely nothing has been done. And this blanket ban that was introduced has actually caused a spike in the illegal deforestation that we've seen around us on community land. And my feeling is that they, for whatever reason, they're unwilling to address this issue because either they don't have an answer or because it's a very difficult one to address. So the legislation that was in place seemed to be working perfectly apart from the corruption. And I think the issue is that there is, unless they can come up with a solution for this corruption, doesn't matter how much legislation is introduced, it's not going to fix the issue. And what we've seen is by shutting down all of the sustainable charcoal production that was taking place and the market that was beginning to be introduced for that, they've just increased the illegal charcoal, and we've seen a spike in that. So, I mean, and this forest policy really doesn't address that, and yet it is, to many extents, one of the most pressing parts of the forest policy that needs to be addressed.
Okay, thanks, Adams. I think we have got your point. Let me move on to William, then finally, Olivia.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I want to say my name is William Kimosop. I am a warden in the county governments. And I want to actually echo Dr. Walubengo's sentiment on the role of these county governments, especially in the forests. Previously, in the 2005 Act, the repeal, it recognized the local authority forests then. And I think it still stands, because we have, as local authorities, a number of quite a big chunk of forests, which are technically supposed to be managed by these county governments. I will tell you, it is only 2 or 3 county governments who have a forester. And to add on that, the issues of the illegal, the tragic event that happened for the Nairobi or the Ngong forest, I'll tell you for free that the reason why it just went that way also was that the county government was given a hand to really to continue with
William, sorry to interrupt, but please.
Hello?
William, I'm saying just make it brief and to the point so that we have time for other participants to engage.
Thank you. But the point is, I think there is now need for these county governments to get management. People who gave the planning or the development permits, the planning department, are actually the counties. So if there is nothing in the form that tells you, is this a forest or what, you just sign out the form people develop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, William. Let's have Olivia, and please make it brief. Then we can have Dr. Walubengo responding to the issues raised. Olivia?
Thank you, Celine. Can you hear me?
You are a bit low. Can you make it louder?
I cannot hear Olivia.
Olivia, you've muted. Okay. Now you can speak. Olivia, are you there? Olivia, are you still there? Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Under section, can you hear me now, Daktari?
Yes.
If I'm not audible, I'll type my question. My question is
so we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so in reference to section 6.1 on ecosystem services, payment for ecosystem services has been mentioned as a sustainable business model, I think, to raise funds for the sector. So my question is, Daktari, given that there are a number of governance challenges, and especially in regards to the county's role in the management of forest, do you think that this approach is timely, or is it realistic to talk about payment of ecosystem services at this stage? Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia. That was a very straightforward and clear question. So, Dr. Walubengo, we are back to you. And in a nutshell, maybe if I can just summarize the issues that have come out from those 6 participants, I think you need to shed some light on charcoal production. Of course, Dr. Wamukoya has done it justice by explaining quite a bit of it. And then you also need to maybe shed some more light on community participation, because it seems to be a concern, especially with regard to Pelis. And finally, there's William, who has raised concerns about the county government's involvement in forest management. And actually, there has been some proposal that forest degradation is taking place, originating from mainly forest stations. So if there can be a forest conservation committee that is all encompassing, including non-state actors, then it would be easy to maybe manage forests from the forest station. So maybe you can respond to those before we move on, in the interest of time. Thanks, Daktari.
Thank you very much, moderator. First of all, let me thank all the contributors, Lucy, Dr. Mkoya, Nixon, William, Adams, and Olivia. I like Olivia Diamba, she used to work with me. And of course, I've worked a lot with Dr. Mkoya, and I miss his clear writings on environment and forestry. Mkoya, urudi bwana. So, regarding Lucy's comment about illegal logging and illegal charcoal making, we make logging illegal when we pass a law. For example, say you need a permit to transport your own timber from your own farm to the market. You see, by doing that, we are making it illegal. And I get arrested if I cut my own tree and I take it to the over to the market. So we really need to make laws which do not punish people who are trying to do good things. Illegal logging is there, I accept. Yesterday I was in the Mau and I saw people are continuing with illegal logging up to now. And the reason is, has been mentioned, there's a lot of corruption. So if we take care of corruption, this illegal logging and illegal charcoal making will be out. And I think Adams has mentioned it well. When you ban charcoal, a blanket ban on charcoal, what happens is that the beneficiaries are the police on the roadblocks. The charcoal still moves. So corruption becomes now, there's a spike in corruption. And then people go and cut the trees in the community lands so that they make charcoal. The main thing is, let us not make laws which make things illegal and yet we're using them. Charcoal use is not illegal, and yet charcoal making in many ways is illegal. But Dr. Mukoya wrote a very good charcoal regulations. Why we don't use them, I have no idea, to be honest. But they're there, and we can use them. And then Dr. Mukoya's mentioning about the policy, his statement about policy is quite correct. We should get the policy to Parliament before we get the bill there. Yesterday, I was in the Mau where Pelis is being practiced. And it's very interesting that the Pelis is supposed to be for local communities, those communities which are adjacent to forests. But what's happened is that these communities have leased out their portions to people from elsewhere. I've met my own nephew who is supposed to be living in Kitale, is in the Mau and is saying that he's an Okek. This is the son of my sister whom I come after. I don't know when he became an Okek. So there's this corruption that is afflicting police and afflicting community participation. And it's a question of getting to the bottom and not banning it. You cannot say we're banning police and we're banning communities from participating in forestry. In any case, I was in Kakamega a few weeks ago, and the people asked me, what's the name of this forest? I said Kakamega Forest. And they asked me, what are the Kakamegans? You see, so if the forest is called Kakamega Forest and the people who live there are called Kakamegans, then it's a forest. I want to make a supportive statement to William Kimosop, the warden, that local authority forests were recognized in the Forest Act of 2005, and there was a good reason for that. Right now, local or county governments do not have forest officers. And that's why I mentioned earlier on that this policy is not supporting county governments to have the extension staff, advisory services, so that they can assist farmers and community forests. Regarding what Olivia just said about pests, for me, in one of my comments, I've said that instead of the policy statement just beating around the bush, about pests, we should state that the government will include pests in their law. Many governments have done that. This business of saying it's going to be a willing buyer, willing seller, and so forth, it doesn't seem to be working. So let us just put pests in the law. After all, pests is already in the law. If you look at your electricity bill, you'll find that there is a section for paying warma, for conserving forests. Therefore, I think that that can be done so that pest comes in directly. There was a section, and I forget which, where the government is amending about various institutions, the Kenya Forest Service, the Kenya Water Towers Agency, KWS, and I think there was another one about conflict under the Museums of Kenya, conflict in managing forests. This is a government, for God's sake. How can a government lament about its own institutions? You sort out the institutions. You tell KFS that you are in charge of A, and KWS you are in charge of B, and museums you are in charge of C. You cannot lament that there's a conflict among your own institutions. As a parent, if there's a conflict among my own children about the piece of land which I'm about to give them, I simply write the names of the pieces of land I'm allocating those children. You are going to get 1 acre and you'll get 2 and you'll get 3. And that's that. You cannot lament that, oh, my children or my institutions, I'm unable to deal with them. So let me end here. I'm supposed to run off to another meeting. And I'm looking forward to the recording of this session. And I'm also going to send out all the comments I've got by email. I thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Walubengo. That was quite comprehensive. I think you have responded to everyone's concern, and you have also further explained more about your knowledge of the various issues. We would have wanted you to stay longer, Daktari, but we understand that you have other engagements, and we still hope to engage you. So you are free to leave at your pleasure. Now moving on, yes, you are most welcome. Yeah. So moving on, I can see Dr. Kenya's hand, but Daktari, you will excuse me a bit. Of course, I was going to give you a chance, but after we listen to Mr. Ngatia, and Mr. Ngatia, you have 15 minutes so that we can engage further. I know Dr. Thwita has been involved a lot with communities, especially in terms of participatory forest management and making of those plans with the community forest associations. But I want to give Mr. Ngatia a chance, particularly to talk from a community perspective, because that seemed to be really a big concern from the discussion since we began the meeting. So I think, Mr. Ngatia, if you can take about 10 to 15 minutes to enlighten us more about the feel on the ground with regard to the communities and their participation in forest management. So I'm giving you 15 minutes so that we have enough time for Dr. Thenya to talk to us, and then the other participants to engage. You are welcome.
Okay, thanks a lot, Celine. I'm Gerard Gatia, working with communities, the National Alliance of Community Forest Associations. Policy issues has been a long journey, because I remember when Dr. Orbengo and the Forest Action Network team started the review of the old Forest Act to have the Forest Act 2005. Even at that time, the issues of review of the forest policy 1968 was on board. And so many drafts have come on board, but none has been able to materialize. This one has come on board. But interesting enough, instead of building up the capacity or going into building up the capacity of communities who are the main stakeholders, you find some statements in it whereby they want to phase out things like pellies. The only issue that have been assisting communities in food security and also in establishing of plantations. It is also phased out and anchored on a very short-term vision, Vision 2030. While you have the Constitution of Kenya, we have got very strong chapters on environment. You wonder why a drafter of a policy like this one would anchor it on a Vision 2030, which is lapsing only a next day. And we have a Constitution of Kenya, which is long-term, and has got very strong chapters, especially chapter 62, Article 62, which is on the county government and public land, and also Article 69, and also on other areas where issues of environment is touched. So we would say that the entire vision and the entire forward looking of this policy should change and be a long-term thing that can work beyond just a vision of 2030. There's also the issue of the restructuring, putting restructuring of KFS as a policy. Surely that's an administrative issue. You cannot put a restructuring of an organization or an implementer of this, of the Forest Act, of the forests in a policy as a continuous process. It is having the administrators of this thing, and then the others are just administrative issues. Issues on county government. If you read Article 62, Article 62 of the Constitution of Kenya, it states very clearly that public land is vested and held by the county government in trust for the people. And it goes down there, it says, the government forests are public, government forests are public, are also public. So if the county government has got a duty in maintaining and managing public land for the good of the people of this country, then it should be in the policy whereby the forest sector should look at in a way of putting the county government and the Kenya Forest Service and other actors together by forming a county forest conservation committee, whereby all those stakeholders together with the community, together with the KFS, together with the county government can sit down and see those forests that are within their own areas, within the public forest and within the community forest. How do we manage them together? That's very key to bring the management and also to reduce conflicts that we have been hearing. Sometimes you find county government saying no more logging in our area, but if they were doing those things together, that thing can be put to an end. When you look at the forward, of this policy, the issue of building up the capacity of communities is not enforced. And we would see the vision of the forward of any law. These are the opening statements that gives us the heart of that law. So would say that more of it has been looked at commercializing forests. Well, forests are not just for commercial basis. Mostly is conservation, multiple use of that land, and also wildlife and water conservation. The issues of wildlife are not well captured. Conservation of wildlife, and it would be good to ensure that issues of wildlife, community participation, and also the issues of water conservation are stressed more within this policy, because they are actually the lifeline of conservation and also livelihood of the people, of our people. I don't have much. I think a lot has been said, especially by Zero and Daktari, and most of what we thought have been touched on, especially on issues of policy. Incentives and benefit sharing is not very well stressed within the policy, and if that is not well captured, we shall continue agitating. Communities will continue agitating for benefits for long time. And as Daktari said, if you phase out, if forests don't pay to the community who are the main stakeholders, they can ban these forests. We know some years back, we had very many forest fires, but since the CFAs came on board, very few forest fires have been experienced. Why? Because they feel they are part forest, they are benefit from these forests. So it is for this policy to ensure continuity and sustenance of forests. The issues of tree farming as a business is one thing that should be put on board, so that we have more trees within our farmlands, so that people may feel farming trees, fruit trees, and other types of trees can pay. But when we just look at forest as a commercial area where we can plant trees, thinking that they will be able to sustain the needs of our people in Tiba, of our people in Fuewood, that is not possible. Our forest land cannot be able to continually sustain the needs of the growing population. We have to stress more on tree farming, being a business within the farmland, within the dry areas, so that communities and other people can also come on board and plant more trees, and even start more cottageous trees, if we stress even on fruit farming. I think that is what I had, although there is also the issue of contract farming, whereby we have large companies and businesses that use a lot of wood, like the KTDA, the schools. If we encourage contract farming and be one of the areas where we can promote more tree farming outside the forests, we can be able to meet the targets that the country is talking about. But it's not 10%, it should be 10% and beyond. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Ngatia. That was quite comprehensive. Thank you for voicing the concerns of the community and explaining more about how communities should be involved in forestry. And thank you also for putting a human face to it, so that it's not just something that is technically done, but something that relates with people in terms of livelihood and also commercialization of the forest, as much as we want to conserve the forest. So I'm sure Dr. Thuita Thenya would contribute on a similar platform. So I'll give him this particular chance to to talk about what he feels with regard to the policy, because he has been in this sector for quite a long time, and then now we can engage with the participants. So, Dr. you have about 2 or 3 minutes to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Serene. And
Dr. Tanya, are you still there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. And please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Tanya from University of Nairobi, and a long-serving member of Kenya Forest Working Group. We have worked with Gatia, Dr. Rubego, who has left the meeting, on community forest associations, and also on issues about pastoral forest management in the country. And now that we have a chance to look at this forest legislation, the important things that have been nagging the sector that maybe we need to look at. And Celine, there are many things, but maybe I just go specifically to a few things that maybe will be important for this particular session. Is one of them is the current arrangement for the CFA in terms of registration and operation is very weak. And if you look in terms of the engagement, how they are registered, they are not registered necessarily for KFS. They are registered for any other sector. And then they come to KFS to work with the KFS. The KFS law does not necessarily recognize the CFA as partners to work with. They are secondary stakeholders who might come or they don't come. So even if they are formed in a station, KFS operations are not necessarily interlinked with the Kenya Forest, with the CFA presence. They are not necessarily recognized. So that's something that we need to look at in terms of registration and how they are in terms of operation. The other thing is that we cannot continue to talk about Paris being banned. And although there's a lot of discussion about Paris only takes about 5%, 4.5 actually, of the forest cover in the country. Very small, but a lot of noise that is coming from the Paris sector. And simply because of how it is structured, so that every other time we seem to be condemning Kenya Forest Service rather than looking at how this one could actually be supported as a timber production. Go to any house, go to any office, including conservation organization. There's no office without timber. So we need to look at how can we be able to support this particular sector through the policy arrangement to make sure that it's continued to operate for the profit of the country, for the economic growth, and also to support the community. Particularly now, I'd like to specifically talk about Paris, because if you look, the first 3 years, community engaged very actively. But after the fourth year, they are not anywhere. And after that, you don't find anywhere even when the timber is being harvested. We need to find a way how continuously, as neighborhood stakeholder, they are continuously engaged up to the harvesting time. They don't appear anywhere. The third one, which I think is very important, I only have that in the fourth because of the time you're giving me, is that we can say we have no extension sector for the forestry. And I was happy to hear Kimosop talk about that there are no forests at the county level. I would actually say they are not, even their budgeting is actually very pathetic. Yet, if you want farmers to grow trees that will be able to produce charcoal, that will be able to produce timber, then the support services must be there. Which trees are they growing? How do they grow them? How do they price their timber so that they can also benefit and support the forestry sector? If you go to Thika, you'll find there's a lot of trees on the farm, but are the farmers benefiting? Because maybe they don't know how to price their timber. They don't know which particular tree. They don't know how to prune the trees. They just let it grow. The fourth one, based on time given me, is that charcoal is something that need to be captured as an important product. The way we capture electricity, the way we have captured biodiversity, that charcoal need to be a sector that required to be produced, because if you look at it in terms of economic for this country, it could actually be the second largest employer. It has got more money than most of the other sectors. It can lie for tea in terms of the amount of money that is actually able to move within the treadmill. Yet, we produce the charcoal rules, which I think have been discussed many times in this country. I was happy to hear our Bengo and Omkoya talk about it. We had charcoal NAMA, which I also happened to have participated in. And it had very clear provisions. How do we ensure sustainable supply of biomass? How do we ensure supply efficient technologies, but never been implemented? How is that one captioned in the policy to ensure that charcoal is not condemned? There are many investors who want to come to the country to actually do charcoal and do it at a high efficiency, just like they're doing in Ghana and other countries. But you cannot come because if you go to Kitui, it is an illegal product. Yet, if I want a charcoal in my house at this particular time, I get it. If you go to Narok, you cannot produce charcoal. How can the county government, how can this policy support the county government to be able to facilitate charcoal production as a sustainable economic activity? And lastly, is that I think there's something that KFS need to do to conserve our biodiversity. The policy talks very well about biodiversity, but as long as the link to the institution is very weak, this policy provision for biodiversity, which is very good, we'll never see the light of the day. How do you ensure that it translates to a program, a department, a sector within KFS that will eventually look at forest biodiversity? Go to any forest station, you'll never find a list of biodiversity species, but you can find all list of plantation species. So I think those are critical things that we need to do if we need to make sure that you can restructure the forestry sector, because KFS to me as an institution required to be supported to be able to do this. And because at times you can never restructure yourself, then how do you firstly to make sure that it actually works? I'll stop there, Celine. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thenya, and good to hear from you after a long while. Dr. Thenya has been working very closely with communities through were basically suggestions or solutions to some issues that have been raised, and of course recommendations. So that is quite good, because you are not really raising questions, but you are giving recommendations on what should be done through policy implementation. So that is well received. And let me move on to the charts before I open the floor for people to continue with the discussions. I don't know if Peter Moll, you want to maybe explain what you have just written on the chat, because I can give you a chance. But there's a comment from Edward Mwendwa that is actually alluding to what Mr. Ngatia has said, and what even Dr. Dominic Walubengo emphasized on in terms of community participation. So he says that it would be a disaster to ignore community role in managing and protecting the forest. The success of that partnership is right at our doorstep. For example, Karura Forest. Steve, from the charts, I think you are giving a recommendation, but at the end of it, you are saying that restructuring of KFS is not a policy issue. So maybe I can just give you a chance to explain in 1 minute what you meant by restructuring of KFS is not a policy issue. Steve Vitella.
Thank you so much, Celine. I think I just kind of put the recommendation there based on the discussions that are coming, that in the current draft, there is a proposal to remove some certain functions from Kenya Forest and reduce them to some issue, to kind of only regulatory. That is where that comment is coming from. And, in a nutshell, when you want to restructure, because the functions of KFS are actually outlined in the legislation. So the restructuring actually begins with a debate in amending the legislation, which is a parliamentary process. That's what I meant. But the policy should actually look at governance issues within the forest sector rather than restructuring the forest sector.
Okay, thank you, Steve. There's also another comment from Lucy Warwinge. And Lucy is saying that also a robust collaboration framework for sustainable forest management is needed with community, industry, and civil society. Lucy, would you want to expound on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I think it's self-explanatory, just that to overcome some of the issues we are pointing out here, we cannot domicile the forest management as just a function of the forest department or KFS. It really has to open up to ways of engaging more robustly, not only with local community who are neighboring, but also private sector, people in industry, and NGOs, so that at every level, whether it's on the ground level or at the governance level, the various players and actors are able to add value for sustainable forest management. This is really, I'm not sure where it would fit in, but I feel if we have to be forward looking, we've really got to think about collaboration, which will lend itself to building better innovation and better engagement.
Okay, thanks, Lucy. I think I can give a chance to Peter. I think Lucy, your points are considered and understood. So we can move on to Peter, because Peter seemed to have many recommendations on the chat. Maybe he can be given a chance to speak before we move on.
Thank you very much, Celine. Some of them are recommendations, and also some of them are questions. Basically, I remember there was a national forest program that was made in 2016 or 2017. And this was when the environment and wildlife were under one ministry. So I was just curious how this national forest program document can be used in this policy review. Another question was how to go about bringing more intergenerational equity across the board in this policy, which also in turn, how do we go about maintaining youth in the policy? And then we had exchange with Lucy on the biodiversity aspect of the policy, and also William also brought about how the biodiversity inventory is a missing link. And so again, how do we strengthen the biodiversity aspect within the policy, as well as climate change and climate action? And then last but not least, for now, is basically, it looks like the community aspect is a huge bone of contention. And I wanted to know why this is so, and what is the reason, which would also help in terms of the policy review from the youth aspect, learning from why community, which should be a core component, has been such a huge issue of making it meaningful and structural. And I know a lot of progress has been made in community engagement and community forest associations coming up, but what is still missing, and why is it like that? And I think last but not least was just the aspect of looking at this policy framework and how we had mentioned about the management bill and the policy, and how the policy, even when we were engaging the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, they know that they need to have this policy to influence the management bill, because if the management bill goes ahead without the policy, then it will be not empty, but weakened. And hence, getting it right is very important. And someone talked about the process. And so what again can be done to make sure that the policy and management bill and the engagement in Parliament bears fruit, and we don't have another document that doesn't have teeth or doesn't have the depth that is needed. I think that's all I'll say for now, but I may have a question later on.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Anyone in the group who wants to respond to what Peter has said, especially his inquiry about why is it that the question of community participation is still an issue, yet communities are already participating in forest conservation?
Perhaps I can respond on community participation. There's
Yes,
been an
Mr.
issue. There has been an issue because of one thing. Even previously, the Forest Act 2005 talks about every forest, every public forest shall be managed with forest management plan. And it also states that the state shall ensure formulation of that process. But through the years, all the forest stations in this country, it is the CFAs that have been looking for funds and developing PFMPs, participatory forest management plans, and even going as far as sometimes funding for the development of management agreements. There has not been any facilitation from the government of the KFS in implementing the PFMPs. While you look at the water resource sector, the water, the WARMA has been assisting RUAs in development of SCAMPs, that is site that is management plans, site-specific management plans, and also going as far as forming the water sector trust fund, whereby the RUAs can be able to get funds and implement those scams. The water sector has been very well structured, whereby a RUA can be able to get the first allocation of just about $500,000. If they implement the program well, they can get another higher, that's about $1 million, going ahead up to a certain area where the RUA can get up to 50 million. And that one has made the RUAs very accountable to the government and to themselves. But look at the CFAs. You form a PFMPs, you look for your funds, it is already signed by the KFS, but you are left on your own. So you find the issue of capacity building of communities has not been one that has not been a priority within the forest sector. And so many of them are left just on their own. And they are sometimes blamed, you are not strong, you have got conflicts, but these are farmers surviving on their own, but trying their best to conserve the forest for their own good and for the good for the entire country. So I would think that this policy should go a little bit further. Instead of just leaving the communities on their own, and they are the main stakeholders. Without the communities, forests in this country are doomed. The water management is doomed. The wildlife sector is also doomed. I'll give you just a short, because I don't want to waste a lot of time. I neighbor the forest. I've grown next to the forest. From my house to the Mount Kenya forest is less than 20 meters. Elephants come to my home every day. They destroy our crops every day, but we still maintain these forests. We have got electric fences, which we manage as a community, but the forest sector is now saying the little that we can be able to get should be phased out. It is not fair. Something should be done to ensure that communities in this country are recognized as the main stakeholder, and it can only be done in a policy like this one. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ngatia, for that elaborate explanation. I think, Peter, you are now well answered about why community participation still remains an issue, despite the various platforms that have been set for them to participate in forest conservation. So I can see a hand from Dr. Wamukoe. I think he wants to maybe further explain what Mr. Ngatia has been saying. So Dr. Wamukoe, I can give you the floor.
Yeah, thanks. Very quickly, two things. One, on the policy relationship with the community and the visioning. I think this policy goes contrary to the Constitution. In my view, the policy ought to recognize that they are actually county forests. And Mau is one such, and I think all of you can remember what happened in Mau, where there was trouble as to whether KFS can be moving people out of the Mau forest, the part that is managed by the county government. So in my view, just to build on what Ngatia and Kimosop said, I think they need to have a paradigm shift in the way this policy addresses it, because in the Constitution, and as read together with the fourth schedule, it's very clear that the KFS or national government is only to provide policy guidance, whereas the actual work down there is supposed to be done by the communities and the county government. So the question would be, how can the policy be structured in a manner that it makes a clear distinction between the functions that will be done at the national level and the functions that are devolved, so that the county government, together with the communities, can take that responsibility. Second, a comment I wanted to respond to Peter is, yes, I think as one of the guiding principles, we should have inter and intragenerational equity, because there's no way you're going to talk about forests without looking at that perspective. And in that respect, therefore, if I were writing this, I would have a specific section dealing with actually the role of the youth in this particular sector, because it's a very important sector, and you must provide tools as to how that's going to be done. And then finally is a question of incentives. I think and that's why if the policy can define and demarcate the role of national and county government, then it becomes very clear as to what will be the appropriate incentives that will be made available for communities, and it will address this challenge that we're having. Yes, I know I was part of that process where we are saying we put fences and then the communities support the maintenance so that they feel they're responsible. But eventually that has been left as a burden to the communities, as Ngatia is saying, and that's not be the case. I mean, if it's a national heritage, it is for the people of Kenya, then we must find a framework that the whole country is able to support those people who are having that challenge. So the issue of incentives, and particularly to the communities living around the forest, is important, and that's why PELIS becomes important, and that's why the PFM becomes important, and that's why the PES, in fact, PES should be mandatory. And as Dr. Walubengo said, it's already in our water bill, and therefore there's no reason why communities from Mount Kenya, from Badeas, from our water towers should not be getting resources to enable them to support themselves and doing their work. So I think, in my view, I think there's an opportunity, and if we miss this opportunity, it's going to be chaotic, because we still have a conflict between our forests and communities and the national government. The law is very clear, the constitution is very clear. Forest management at that lower level, and the rest is supposed to be done at a local level. The question is, how does the policy help us to demarcate those roles of the national government and the county government?
Okay, thank you, Daktari, for that very elaborate explanation. And I'm happy that you are bringing out the aspect of governance and relating it to the constitution. And you've also talked about how the policy should engineer the understanding of how forest management should be done between the national and the county government. There's also the issue of intergenerational conservation, and I think I agree with you. We need to bring on board the youth so that as we are conserving trees, it is not just the old people's business. So that one is very, very important. And also the issue of incentives is quite important, and you have emphasized again the importance of PELI, space, and participatory forest management. I'm seeing Dr. Penya's hand is up, and I am guessing that he wants to add to what Dr. Wamukoe and Mr. Ngatia has said. So Dr. Penya, you can take the stage.
Very quick, I just want to add what I've said, and I think I support them. But I look specifically at the draft policy, and if you look at it, where does it mention about community forest association? Those were only mentioned in the review of what has happened before, but it doesn't provide for anything about how we'll actually deal with the community forest association. It's mentioned 4 times, but doesn't tell us how are we going to deal with them, how would we engage them in the forestry. The second one is that when you look at participation, how is participation of community provided for in the policy? You look at it that there's no specifically aspect of particular article that deals with community participation. It's only a part of sustainable forest management, is a part of biodiversity, but it doesn't deal specifically with aspect about how do we do with community participation. This is what the CAB comes, so that we have, whether it comes in the objective, whether it comes in the provisions of the policy, I think those are clear statements that as stakeholders will be able to provide to the consultant to be able to include them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Penya. I think also in our meetings, the issue of community participation was raised. So you are just on point, because the same concern arose that community participation is not really given some due space within the policy. So we will capture that, and we'll take note of it and submit to the ministry. I want to open the floor because we only have 15 minutes left. Any other person who has a comment, particularly on commercial forestry? I can see on the chat box, there's someone who has talked about indigenous forest and private sector engagement in forest plantation. The person is called Marketa Antoninova. So would the person like to explain more about that point that he has put on the chat box?
Yes, hello, how are you everybody? Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so throughout the policy, in not only in the part of indigenous forest, but also the coastal forest, there is no mention about including private sector. And when we read through later in the policies through financing, it is very clear that especially the conservation forests will need a long-term financing and very clear business plans how to sustain them. I feel that it has to be bring out in this policy much more that how the private sector can play the role in supporting the forest, whatever indigenous or coastal, because we always talk about private sector only in relation to the plantations, but private sector is playing and will play a more important role even in this indigenous conservation forest.
Okay, thank you for that comment. We'll take it up too. Anyone else who wants to shed some light on the policy? Anything else you feel was not captured in the policy, or something that is not clear within the policy that you need addressed?
Could I go, Celine?
Yes.
I just wanted somebody to clarify for me why we are discussing about forest, yet we have a national bamboo policy that is separate from the forest. And at the same time, when you read both the documents, it does recognize that bamboo has always been an integral part of our indigenous forests in Kenya. And how does, then what's the connection between bamboo policy and this forest policy that we are discussing at the moment? It's just a question that I'm throwing to the floor.
I can see Dr. Wamukoe's hand is up. Doc, you can answer that. Thank you.
Yeah, in the traditional policy formulation, but not these days, things have changed. Once you have an overarching policy, like for example, forest policy, any species or subsector, it is supposed to be a strategy, because you have a policy and then a strategy below. But these days, what happens is that the policy with a capital P, which is a bigger, for the overarching national, is now being subsumed to even subsectors, which is supposed to have a small p. Small p is what is for specific, but feeding into, it must be feeding into the bigger P, which is the forest policy. So in the best, for the best representation, we should not have had a bamboo policy, we should have had a bamboo strategy, so that it becomes a tool for specific attention to bamboo. And now that raises a problem, because if you have an overall overarching forest policy, and then you have specific policies for different species, and the question is where they conflict, and if they are not anchored at the overarching policy, then you're going to have conflicts, and those conflicts become a big issue, especially when you are drafting the law. So in the traditional way, we should not be having a policy in terms of the traditional with a capital P. It should be a strategy which is anchored under the overarching forest policy, which is for the whole sector.
Okay, thank you, Doc, for that educative explanation. I hope, Steve Itela, you are answered.
Yes, I'm answered. Thank you.
Yes, and I think the rest of us have also benefited from that explanation. So we are 10 minutes away from our concluding time. So I think if, Dr. your hand should go down now. I think you've spoken, unless you have something else you want to say. Dr. Wamukoe, is your hand still up?
No.
It has, okay, it has gone down now. Okay, thank you. So I think we need now to conclude the meeting. And just before we do that, I want to check if there's anyone who still has a comment. I can't see anybody's hand up. Anyone who wants to comment about the policy?
Hi, Celine.
Yes, Wamboi.
This is Wamboi Nderito, Ecotourism Kenya.
Yes.
Mine is just to emphasize the points on the chart, how important ecotourism and benefits to the community can be accrued from sustainable forest management, and how it should actually be a whole section in that policy, because it's one of the non-consumptive ways that the communities can actually reap benefits from protecting the forest, which is in their location, which they own by virtue of it's in their area. So it should be given extra emphasis on the policies and also in the linkages with the private sector and other sectors.
Okay, thank you, Wamboi. We've captured that, so we'll also include it in our recommendations or concerns to the ministry. Anyone else who has something else to comment across the board? It could be commercial, it could be livelihood oriented, community participation, or basically
Lynn, can I say something?
Yeah, I have a number of hands now. I think Paula is in-house, so I'll give you the first chance, Paula. Then I'll have William Kimosop. Mr. Ngatia's hand is also up. I can see Peter Moll and then zero. So let's start with Paula. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you. I'm sorry I came a bit late. It's been a very busy day.
It's okay.
I'm concerned that one, the policy is so long and wordy, and really, I don't think it's addressing that we are actually facing an ecological crisis with our forests. Several people mentioned about the biodiversity, the lack of information about what species are there in our forests. If you go down to the coast where we have some of the most diverse forests in the world, apart from Arabuko, Sokoke, and Shimba Hills, which are protected, and maybe Mida Creek and the mangroves, those other fragments of forest are just, if you look at Google Maps, you'll see that they are just in tatters. There is no incentive in our forestry policy or in our laws for local communities to protect those forests outside of the national protected forests. And yet we are really advocating for communities to have access to the protected forests. One of the problems that I see is that because there isn't really a proper national assessment of the state of our forests, it's very hard for people to comment on what is the condition of these places. They may be gazetted on the ground as forests, but actually there are no trees in most of these forests. You go to Cherenganis, go to Mau, go to these places, there are no trees left. Go to right here in Nairobi, look at Ololua Forest. How did they build the railway right across the forest without even doing an EIA, causing an enormous amount of damage? So I think there's a real problem. One is there are no incentives that are implementable that will encourage anybody to actually practice forestry or defend indigenous forests. We spend a lot more time planting trees and not defending the indigenous forests and the indigenous species. I think that that is something that has not come out strongly in this policy. The other thing is on the CFAs. So I'm involved in the Ololua Forest CFA. I know that we keep talking of Karura as this great model. Karura is a one standalone kind of model because of its location and right in in that particular part of Nairobi. If you look at Ololua Forest and many of our other forests, there are hundreds of CFAs and most of them are not working properly. There is a real breakdown. And as we tried to create our CFA, it's so complicated. It's really, really difficult. It's not something that is obvious to anybody, and it's expensive, even for local people. When they say create a CFA, it's expensive. You know, you have to go registering documents, you have to have X number of meetings. There's all kinds of things you have to do before communities can actually participate in forestry. So there's a real challenge, I think, even when we talk of involving communities, for communities, and then for what urban people want, the uses are very different. So I think that these are some of the issues that have to be brought up. This issue of CFAs needs to be addressed properly. You know, how they should work and where they should work. And maybe not all forests can be managed properly under a CFA, because they need to be, what's the word, overseen. You know, there needs to be some policing. The other thing is about, the last thing I wanted to say is about how we account for our forests. The national government has put it at something like 7.5% of Kenya is forested. That is not correct. 7.5% is tree cover. And if you have a banana tree, it's captured. If you have an orange tree, if you have macadamia tree, that is part of our tree cover. That is not forest. The actual forest cover of Kenya is a very, very small fraction. It's maybe only 2% or something like that. And there's a problem in the way that we classify forests in Kenya. That is something that this policy needs to come out properly. What is a forest? And what is the state of our national forests? Because at the moment, this forest cover includes plantations, orchards, and indigenous forests. And while plantations might be increasing, our indigenous forests and all that biodiversity is disappearing. Forests are far more important for biodiversity than our savannas, even the Masai Mara. Forests are far more important. And we need to be accountable at an international level, not just locally. And I think that needs to come out in this policy, that just the way for national parks we have IUCN, there are other centers that look at indigenous forests and the management of indigenous forests and the documentation or the accounting of those indigenous forests. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Paula. I'm happy that you've raised issues that were also a concern in our 3 meetings that we've held. And I think something that is coming out clearly that also came up in those meetings is about the tree cover and the percentage. So we need to have an accurate percentage. And I think we are also concerned about the definition of forests. I think in those meetings, that is something that really came out so strongly. And we also captured the issue of us being signatories to international conventions and our participation in increasing the forest cover, not just for national benefit, but internationally. So I'll move on and give a chance. Thanks, Paula. I'll move on and give the chance to someone who has not spoken. So Gabriel, your hand is up, and then I'll go to Zero before I move to the other people who have raised their hands. That's William, Peter, and Mr. Ngatia. So let's have Gabriel quickly, and please make it brief for those who have raised their hands.
Okay, thank you so much, Celine. I'm Gabriel from Bungoma. We are working with farmers on issues of agroforestry, which partly contributes to the element of forest cover. But there are still some challenges that we're experiencing in terms of accessibility of the planting materials, more so when it comes to issue of seeds, accessing the viable seeds, as well as the potting materials, because we normally establish the nurseries, support farmers in establishing the nurseries. So at some point, there were issues that we are not supposed to use the polythene papers, but the alternative have not been provided so clearly. So I don't know, moving forward, what are we supposed to do when we still intend to promote the forest activity?
Sorry, thank you, Gabriel, and thanks for joining us all the way from Bungoma. We have registered your concerns, and I think we will also include them in the brief that we are going to write to the ministry. So thank you very much. If we have someone who can respond to that, well and good, but allow me to move on to Zero. So Zero, please take the floor.
Thank you, Celine. This question is directed to Dr. Wamukoya. I would like him to comment on the way the drafters related the policy statements to the policy objectives. There seems to be no clear relation between the policy objectives and the policy statements as appears in this document. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The question is noted. So Dr. Wamkoya, please prepare to answer that, but I'll move on and give the chance to William. I'll come back to Dr. Wamkoya Zero to answer your question. So William, please carry on and make it brief.
Okay, very briefly. I just wanted to bring out the issue of cultural forests, which I think was probably not captured anywhere. And these include sacred sites, herbal places, herbal salt licks and all that. And then the other one is about forests as a national and international heritage sites. I think again, that needs, to me, needs to come out clearly. And again, the last one is about another kind of forest which may not seem important, but to me, I find it important. These are the petrified forests. These are the fossil forests which we have all over the northern part of the rift. They need some kind of recognition within this, even though we know that the national museums have them as sites. But as well, it should be of interest because of climate change and all these other issues. And lastly, I really think that we now need to address the issue of wildlife habitats. You know, the forest as wildlife habitats. As it is, there is very little efforts in the forestry sector to actually look at wildlife in the forest as an important aspect. A lot of poaching is currently going on there, but nobody really cares. And sometimes when the other agency, KWS, comes in, it looks like there is some interference. We have seen that in many cases. And this is something that should be very strong, a proper framework for inter-agency collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, William. Let me move on to Susan. Susan from Lake Naivasha Basin has not said anything. Then I'll come back to Peter Moll, and then there is Dr. Jonathan Murioki who would like to talk about agroforestry, and then I'll finalize with Ngatia and Dr. Wamukoya to respond to Zero's question. So Susan, please quickly, and please make it brief.
Okay, thank you, Sarin. Mine is just a note. I want to echo what Mr. Ngatia said about the RUAs having a kitty from WSTF, but unlike the CFAs, who I don't know whether they have such a kitty to prowl back to the management of the forest, but within the policy, they have talked about the PES, and I was thinking around if the PES kitty can be institutionalized within the policy so that it can form a basis as a kitty maybe for the CFS, so that it can be proud back to the CFS in the management of forest, and so that it can accrue also to the benefit sharing aspect to them. And also, I wanted also to echo on the issue of
Susan, you are breaking.
Sorry, on the issue of okay, I wanted also to talk about the issue of carbon credit. I don't know what is the status in the country about it, although the policy talks of the emerging funds from the international community, but the government has not committed as in how they are going to approach the issue of carbon credit. Is it an on-farm, through the on-farm growth of trees? Because they have not talked of the carbon credit on the protected areas. I don't know how can they go about the protected areas and the carbon credits, but for agroforestry, it's workable, although it's not yet clear on the policy how they are going to go about the carbon credit as giving back to the community so that it can motivate them, both as incentives and ownership of protecting this forest. Thank you, Celine.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. I think your point is very clear, and thank you for raising such important concerns. So we have taken note of that. Thank you very much. So let me move on to Peter. Peter Moll.
Yeah, thank you for the floor again. I think I just want to echo and stress on the point on how we can integrate wildlife into this policy, because even while engaging the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, many of them feel that the wildlife aspect in the policy is very weak, and then that doesn't help them when it comes to intersectoral engagement and when it comes to also management and implementation of any strategies that will come up. And so the policy needs to back up and justify the wildlife engagement within the forestry policy, and obviously looking at the importance of wildlife when it comes to the ecosystems and the habitats, and vice versa. And then the last point that I want to bring out is the fact of that we need to make sure that we learn from the past and ensure that the policy protects and engraves the participation of community and youth, and that it is clear and that it is meaningful, and that the fact that community and youth are not just stamps at the end of the road, are not just called upon when they are needed or thought to be needed, but are very much part of the process throughout. And this is something that I'm noticing as we're pushing for mainstreaming of youth within this policy. I'm noticing that the community have had a lot of things that have held them back, and the policy needs to protect that. And I think that's something that needs to come out clearly. Of course, someone had said adding a whole sector on youth, but also I believe youth needs to be mainstreamed throughout the policy. And just bringing up the point of the climate change and climate action and the biodiversity part in the policy is very weak, and that's something that needs to be strengthened. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I think that emphasis is noted. So we move on to Dr. Jonathan Murioki. The floor is yours. Jonathan, are you still with us? Jonathan, you've muted your microphone. Please put it on. Okay, as we wait for Jonathan to get on board, I think Dr. Wamkoya, you can answer the question about objectives and policy statements being in sync. I think that was raised by Moses Zero.
Yeah, the simple answer is that one, we should not have too many objectives, because when you have too many objectives, you cloud the purpose for the policy. The policy must be known for something.
Yes.
And that something must be very clear, very succinct. And normally policies, a good policy should have 5, if you go to 5, 7 maximum, or 6, 7 objectives, but normally it's best it would be for 5, which are broad enough to capture the subsets. Number 2 is that when you are writing the different sections of the policy, then you have to make sure that they address each of the objectives. Yes. Because if the objectives are not addressed at all, then you have no policy, because you have no basis upon which you are making statements on what you want done. And that is the clearest. And so, Mr. Zero, the issue here is there must be synchrony between the objectives and the statements, policy statements that are therein. Quickly, if you can allow me, I can, Peter, from writing a policy, let me tell you, very frank, because I did the wildlife, I did the forest, I did many others. I can tell you, you cannot say you want to mainstream youth everywhere. You end up having a problem, because each section must have the key targets of what you want. And therefore, when you say you want to put, yes, you can even, you know, we have this fashion where we say, add youth and gender. Once you put that, yes, you think you have a ministry, but you haven't, because you haven't clarified how you're going to achieve gender and youth. And that's why it's normally that it's understood that that is the need, but you can now have a section on youth of what you think is youth are supposed to be doing, but also put a statement there that youth shall be mainstream in all the other sections covered under this policy. That's how you do mainstreaming. But this mainstreaming, we hear people talking about in terms of drafting a policy or a law becomes very, very difficult.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Daktari, for that explanation. Do we have Jonathan back with us? Jonathan Muriuki?
Yes, I'm back, Celine. How are you?
Okay, I'm fine. Thank you, Daktari. I think you can now raise your point, though I can see it on the chat box, but it's good for you to just explain to us.
Yeah, I was trying to do two things at the same time. So sorry when you asked for me, I think I was concentrating on something else.
Yeah.
Yes, I listened to the question by Gabriel Wekesa on this very touching issue of nurseries and the blow that has been done through through the fact that they cannot use polytubes. And because of that, the Ministry of Agriculture plus the Ministry of Environment and our institution plus other stakeholders, we are doing a national agroforestry strategy that we hope will be up and approved by the end of the year. And one of the things we are doing is to do value chains development, beginning from the nursery all the way to the agroforestry tree products. So we hope to address the constraints around nurseries, including polytubes at that point.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jonathan Muriuki. That's a good work that you guys are doing at the World Agroforestry Center together with other partners. So I hope, Gabriel, you are now comfortable with regard to the issue of agroforestry that you had raised. So let me move on because I want to close up now. There was a hand from someone called S. Veva. So I don't know if S. Veva, you still want to raise your point because I want to close with Mr. Ngatia. SVEVA, are you there? Okay, but there's something you wrote on the chat box, so we will take note of that and include it in our recommendations and comments. So let me move on to Mr. Ngatia because I can see Mr. Ngatia's hand is raised, and then you please allow me to call this meeting to a close. So Mr. Ngatia.
Okay, thanks, Tarine, and thanks everybody for participating in a very important session. I had just one very short thing. Forestry is a it should be managed for a public good, and it should be able to sustain livelihoods and also address other environmental issues. So the multi-purpose use of forests is very important. The issue of wildlife and tourism is not very well captured. The issues of water conservation and water harvesting, which are key in forestry and also livelihood of people, is not well captured. We have an example of very good multi-purpose use of forests like Karura, where you find there is no cutting of trees, but they have been able to employ very many people, and it is raising money. So why it's in this policy, the issue of multi-purpose use of forests should come out very clearly, especially on the introduction part of it, so that the issues of wildlife, bird watching, water, and tourism should also be captured, not just a part of planting trees and harvesting trees. These are short-term, and the major benefits are actually in the other non-consumptive part of forests. Thanks. That's what I wanted to conclude in.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ngatia, for that conclusion. I can see on the chat box someone by the name S. Veva asking if the policy has a stated timeline. I don't remember seeing that in the policy. Did anyone see the timeline for the policy? Is it a 10-year policy, 15 or 20?
No, a forest policy should not have a timeline. It should also give at least a time for review. As it's a long term, because if you are working on a 1968 policy, so a forest policy should have a long term, but allow for reviews after every 5 or 10 years.
Okay.
Normally policies don't have a timeline, but as Gatti has indicated, you can have a proviso that says that the policy shall be reviewed every 5 years or 10 years, so that you are able to update it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I saw that with the National Land Policy of 2009. It was it indicated that the policy will be reviewed after 10 years, and I think it has since been reviewed. So I hope, S. Veva, you are answered. And then there's an inquiry from participants if we would require some extension of time to involve senior forest officers to come and engage with us. So should we request for a time extension beyond the stated deadline, which is the 7th of July, or we are comfortable with the comments that we have given so that we move ahead? By show of hands, can I get people indicating whether we need an extension?
Celine, that's a very tricky question, because the problem, you say you are not in control of that process. Yes. So whether you say extension or not, so my view would be that one, you prepare these notes, make submissions of whatever you already have, but now in that submission you give an indication that we would have liked to get in-depth analysis, and we're requesting if we can have an extension. But otherwise, you must put in something so that you don't lose out.
Yeah, thank you. I thought so. Yeah, I think with what we have collected.
Asked the question, I think that since I asked that specific question, what Dr. Wamkoya has just said is exactly the answer that we were seeking. So we don't even need to belabor it any further, because we were going to do precisely that, but we wanted to be sure that this is something that people were interested in seeing happening.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say the same. So thank you, Dr. Wamkoya, but otherwise we were basically going to submit our comments within the stipulated deadline. And on the basis of the advice that you've given, of course, we can put in a statement that we would have wanted to engage further. So maybe if they can consider giving us more time. But otherwise, we will submit the comments before the due date. So thank you very much, participants. I think for those who have not spoken, for example, David Silankan, S. Veva, and other people who have put their comments on the chat box, we have taken note of that and we will include them in our document. So don't feel that probably whatever you have said has been left out. It has all been captured. And of course, this conversation has also been recorded. So everything that we have discussed here is quite valuable. Thank you for your time, everyone. I know this is a very busy time for people trying to catch up with donor meetings, trying to do activities that can be done that are not field-based, and also trying to look out for people who can fund projects during this time, especially because of the pandemic. So we really appreciate, we don't take it for granted that you took time out of your busy schedules and joined us, because I had some apologies which were indicative of the fact that they had prior arranged meetings with donors and partners. So for you guys who have been able to join us, we thank you a lot. And we also thank you for your valuable input. This is a joint effort. And we know we are going to put up a very comprehensive document that passes some key points to the authority that is responsible to formulate this forest policy. Sorry, we missed out on the KFS. We tried getting in touch with the CCF to give us a representative, but he said that this meeting coincides with the retreat that they had planned as an institution to go out and discuss some issues, including this particular policy. So that's why we couldn't have them on board. But otherwise, we are happy that most stakeholders in the forestry sector and of course across the natural resource sector are here. And your inputs have actually been very useful because it has sustained this discussion this far. So thank you very much. I think I need to call upon Steve or Patricia Worry because they have been in the group that has been organizing this, and Moses Zero, if they have anything to comment on before I officially close the meeting. So over to you, Steve. And Lucy also, if Lucy has something to say.
Okay, I may start. Thank you so much, Celine, for moderating the session and getting a lot of input coming out of the participants, and more so also to thank the participants for showing up within a very, very short time. We had 73 registered, and I think at any one given point, we were on an average of 40 of us who are very active in this particular Zoom meeting. There are different processes that are ongoing. And if you want to submit the proposals directly to the ministry, please do feel free to do that. But we will compile the report, as Selina said, send it again for your comments, so that together as we submit as individuals, institutions, and as partners coming together, all that should be able to help us. But I also want you to keep tab of the validation session that might be there. But I think we need to request for a validation session so that then we can also measure out of the recommendations we put how much of it was captured. So let's not just sit back there, but let's monitor the process as it continues going forward. So mine is to say, tell you, thank you so much, and we'll continue to host again so many of these sessions that will bring us together. Thank you and God bless you.
So Steve, are we going to share with them the recording of the meeting?
Yes, we will share the recording of the meeting so that they can follow up. And I think all the discussions on the chat also will be part of that information that will be shared with them, including also the presentations that were made. So once we get the presentation by Dr. Walubengo, then we should be able to include that also as part of the report they get.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Steve. And let me take this opportunity to finally thank the team that worked towards this, and also thank the panelists. So thank you, Steve, for being at the core of this on behalf of the Conservation Alliance of Kenya. Thank you, Patricia Worry, for also being part of the team. Thank you, Moses Zero, for ensuring that people were given a preview of what we have discussed before. Lucy Warwinge of African Conservation Center, thank you so much for also guiding us in the process. And of course, we thank all the participants for responding to the very short call. I think the notice was quite short, just as Steve has said, but the response was quite overwhelming. So we are very happy that you guys were able to join us, and we hope for continued interaction. So enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We will get back to you with the outcome of this. We'll of course keep informing you of our next steps. So thanks and have a good afternoon.
Thank you too.
You too, Celine.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Celine.
Bye bye.
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 Bye, Ngatia. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Celine.
We appreciate, yes, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, Suzanne.